There are anime that you watch and animes that you spend years trying to understand. ErgoProxy is definitely the second kind. When this anime first came out in 2006, it wasn't trying to be the next huge action series. No. It was dark, slow, strange, and sometimes extremely confusing. And that's probably why so many people gave up on it, you know? Some people call ErgoProxy a masterpiece. Others think it's one of the most pretentious animes that they've ever watched. But there's the interesting part. 20 years later, people are still trying to understand it, still talking about it, still debating its meaning, still arguing about its characters, still trying to piece together what actually happened in this story. And maybe that's because ErgoProxy wasn't designed to give you an easy story, you know, it was designed to make you question everything. What makes someone human? What happens when you lose your identity? Can a machine become conscious? And if the world you've built your life around is a lie, what happens when you finally discover the truth? Those questions are what make ErgoProxy so fascinating. And to understand why this anime still stands out, we need to start with the place where everything begins. Romdew. So, let's set the stage. At first glance, Romdew looks perfect. Humanity has survived a devastating catastrophe. The outside world is practically uninhabitable, so people live inside enormous dome cities designed to protect them. Everything is controlled, everything is organized, and everyone has a role. There are no wild forests, no open skies, no uncertainty, just a carefully constructed society designed to keep humanity alive, no matter how. And on the surface, that sounds like paradise, you know, but ErgoProxy immediately gives you a reason to question it. Because Romdew doesn't just protect its citizens, it controls them. The government decides what people know. Auto reefs assist humans with almost every part of their lives. And when something threatens the system doesn't ask questions, it just removes them. That's important because Romdew isn't simply the location where the story takes place. It's a representation of the world ErgoProxy is criticizing. And in some ways, the world that our world is becoming. It's a society that has eliminated uncertainty by eliminating freedom. And then something goes wrong. The auto reefs begin becoming infected with something called the cogito virus. And suddenly, machines are beginning to behave like they have minds of their own, which raises one of the biggest questions in the entire series. If a machine can think, can it also become a person? And that's where Vincent Law enters the story. At first, Vincent doesn't seem like the kind of character who could carry an entire series. He's quiet, nervous, uncertain, and he's desperately trying to fit into a society that doesn't really accept him. He's an immigrant in Romdew. He wants to become an official citizen. He wants a normal life. He wants to disappear into the system and just live a normal life. But ErgoProxy doesn't let him. Because the more Vincent tries to escape the attention, the more attention seems to find him. And eventually he has no choice but to leave the world he thought he understood. This is where Vincent's story becomes much more interesting. Because his journey isn't really about becoming stronger, it's about discovering what he actually is. And the more he learns, the less he recognizes himself. That's the core of Vincent's characters. He's not searching for some grand destiny, he's searching for an identity, and eventually those two things become impossible to separate. And then there's Ria Maya. Ria is almost complete opposite of Vincent. She's confident, intelligent, suspicious, and she doesn't trust the world around her, which makes her the perfect person to investigate the proxies. At first, Ria 1 believes she's simply investigating a series of strange incidents. But the investigation becomes personal very quickly. She's attacked. Her memories and understanding of events are questioned. People around her are hiding information, and every answer she finds creates another question. And that's when Ria starts realizing something terrifying. The question isn't simply that there are monsters living inside Romdew. The question is that the entire system may be hiding the truth about the world itself. So she leaves the safety of Romdew, and this is one of the most important moments of her character, because Ria isn't just physically leaving the dome, she's leaving behind everything she believes was real. And the further she travels, the harder it becomes separate reality from everything she was taught to believe. This is where ErgoProxy stops being just science fiction. It, becomes a sci-fi mystery. Because underneath all the proxies, conspiracies, and futuristic technology, the show is asking a much simpler question. What does it actually mean to be human? I mean, look at Pino. She's an auto-reeve. Technically, she's a machine, but after becoming infected with the cogito virus, she begins developing something that looks remarkably like individuality. She laughs, she gets scared, she becomes attached to people, she makes choices, she develops her own personality, and suddenly, the definition of human becomes much harder to explain. Because if humanity is defined by consciousness, then what happens when a machine becomes conscious? If humanity is defined by emotions, what happens when a machine develops emotions? If humanity is defined by ability to choose, then what happens when a robot, when Pino decides she can also choose for herself? Maybe the question is, why do we need the label at all? That's one of the reasons ErgoProxy still feels unsurprisingly modern. It doesn't give you a simple answer, it gives you a problem, and it makes you sit with it. But let's talk about some of the biggest criticisms of ErgoProxy, the weird episodes, because yes, there are moments where you're watching the anime and you're like, what am I even watching? The show suddenly changes genre, the pacing slows down, characters end up in bizarre situations, and sometimes it feels like the main story has completely disappeared. It's probably where ErgoProxy loses, some of its viewers. But here's the thing. The series was never interested in giving you the most efficient route from point A to point B. It constantly experiments with perspective, genre, and storytelling. Some episodes feel like psychological experiments, others feel like philosophical thought exercises. Some are almost surreal, and while, others work very well, perfectly fine. It gives the series something more anime, a lot of animes don't have anyway, personality. You can disagree with its choices, you can think some episodes are too slow, too fast, you can even think some of them are completely unnecessary, but you can't really accuse ErgoProxy of feeling like every other anime. And honestly, I'd rather watch that, something ambitious and occasionally messy, than some regular isekai slop. Something that's fine-tunedly polished. So, eventually the mystery surrounding Vincent becomes impossible to ignore. The person Vincent thinks he is and the person he actually is are not the same. And that completely changes how you look at his journey, because all this time Vincent has been trying to escape something. But what if the thing he's running from is himself? That's why his relationship with Riwon matters so much. Riwon represents truth. She tries pushing Vincent towards answers, even when those answers are not the same. And that completely changes how you look at his journey, because all this time it has always been right in front of him. She keeps pushing Vincent towards the truth. Reality becomes psychological. By the final stretch of the story, the series takes that identity crisis and pushes it even further. Reality becomes weird, memories become unreliable, and the question isn't simply who is Vincent, it's who does Vincent choose to be? That's a much more interesting question, because knowing what you are doesn't necessarily determine who you become. And then we reach the final 3 episodes. Romdew begins collapsing. The system that once seemed completely controlled is falling apart. The auto-reebs are affected, the citizens turn against them, and everything that the dome was designed to prevent is finally happening. And then Vincent finally confronts the truth behind his existence. The mysteries that have been hanging over the entire series from the beginning comes together. But the ending isn't really about Vincent becoming some unstoppable hero, it's about acceptance. For the first time, Vincent isn't running away from who he is. He's finally choosing what that identity means. And that's why the ending works better when you look at the entire journey instead of trying to solve every individual mystery. The story was never just asking, who is ErgoProxy? It was asking, what does it mean to accept yourself when the truth isn't what you wanted? And that's why I think ErgoProxy was ahead of its time, Not because every idea it had was completely original, not because every episode was perfect, And definitely not because it's easy to understand. It's actually the opposite anyway. It's slow, it's strange, it's sometimes frustrating. But it trusts you, it trusts your mind, it trusts you to understand. It expects you to think, brainstorm. It expects you to question what you're watching. And it expects you to question what is the meaning of what you're watching. And almost 20 years later, in fact it is 20 years later, we're still having these conversations. That's rare. Most shows want you to remember the story. ErgoProxy wants you to remember the questions. What makes you human? How much of your identity is actually your own? And can you have freedom without uncertainty? And if everything you believed about yourself turned out to be wrong, would you have the courage to keep going? Maybe that's why ErgoProxy has survived. Not because everyone understood it, but because nobody completely agrees on what it means. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what makes it worth watching. So, let me know, have you watched ErgoProxy? If you like this video, please hit that like button, subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you guys in the next video. Ciao.